Tonight we continue our series of interviews with candidates in this year's election for city councilor. Our guest is a candidate from Dorchester who's one of the finalists running at large. We'd like to welcome David Halbert. Thank you very much for being with us, David.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
David, for people who are not familiar with you yet, you have a long history working for city and state governments. Please tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I've had, an over 15-year career working in public service. So I've had the privilege of serving for some amazing people, folks like Governor Patrick at the State House, and then the City Council. Actually served for City Councilor At-Large, former City Councilor At-Large, I should say, Sam Yoon, and former City Councilor for District 6, John Tobin. So covered West Roxbury and Jamaica Plain. And most recently, before becoming a full-time candidate, I was with the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, where I served for 7.5 years and left as their Deputy Director of Community Affairs.
So why do you want to be on the council?
I think the council is an incredible platform from which you can help people and really help guide the city into a new and interesting direction. Having worked there over a decade ago, I can tell you that the council as it currently is constituted is a much more active, a much more engaged council, and it's a much more representative council. And I think that is the secret sauce as to why it's doing more. The fact of the matter is, when I was there, there was one woman on the council, and now we have 6, and there's a possibility after this election's done that we'll have a majority female council for the first time. And that's really important because representation matters, but we're not exactly where we need to be in terms of that full representation. Currently, there's no men of color at all on the city council, and that is a huge population here in our city that needs to have a voice in the education of our children, a voice in how economic development and dollars are being spent in our communities, a voice in every aspect of civic life. And so, I know myself, if I am privileged enough to serve as one of the 4 city councilors at large, I bear a responsibility not just to all of the 670 some odd thousand people here in the city of Boston, but in particular to those individuals who share my experiences on a day-to-day basis.
You're also a Boston Public School parent, and speaking of voices, you want to change the school committee to make some of the positions at least elected. How would that help?
Sure. Well, I had a lot of conversations. Education is obviously a critical piece of how Boston works. It's the largest part of our city's budget as well. And there's folks who, of course, have advocated for moving back fully to an elected school committee, which we changed over 20 years ago. And there are those who think that we should retain it as just an appointed body that is appointed fully by the mayor. I think that the answer lies somewhere in between. What I've advocated for is a hybrid school committee with 7 members, 2 members appointed under the umbrella of the mayor, one of them being a student member with a full voting right, 2 coming from the city council, which currently doesn't really have a hand in the city school committee in terms of selection or approval of members. So 1 being appointed by the city council president, the other being the education chair themselves, and then 3 elected members. There's 9 city council districts, so I'd combine districts 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and 7 through 9 to make 3 new elected school committee districts. And I think in that model, you balance out accountability for both the mayor and the city council, along with advocacy and direct voice and agency for parents, neighborhoods, and communities. But it's also important because in the math piece of it, 7 means that you need 4 to have a majority and move anything along. And as you can tell from the way I just described it, no group starts off with a majority right off the bat. So it incentivizes compromise, it incentivizes collaboration, and hopefully good decision making and policy making for our children.
I want to ask you about another issue that you live pretty close to on the border of Dorchester and Mattapan. That's also the Fairmount Indigo corridor. Rents are going up pretty steeply at some of the larger buildings, at least. What would you like to see done to protect the people who are struggling with that?
Sure. Well, housing is the #1 issue that I've heard out on the campaign trail all across the city, no matter what neighborhood it is. Now, it takes different tones in different communities. Some are worried more about home ownership. Others are worried about rental increases and gentrification, as we alluded to. I think in terms of the specific neighborhood that you're talking about, my neighborhood in Dorchester and across the street in Mattapan, what we're talking about first is reinstituting where we can and advocating for the return of the ability to institute rent control. But I've also said that rent control in and of itself will not solve the housing crisis. I think of rent control more as the bandage on a wound that we have here in the city in terms of housing, but that we need to bandage up that wound so we can get to the hospital and make sure that we're having deeper policy interventions. So that includes increasing the inclusionary development policy number. It's currently at 13% for affordable units and large-scale developments. It should be increased, in my opinion, to a minimum of 20%. And there are those who've talked about increasing it further. I agree, and I think the only way to do that, though, is to do it responsibly. And by that I mean bringing in housing advocates, groups like Right to the City and the organizations that are under that umbrella, along with developers who are going to be the ones ultimately who are building these buildings, so that we can come to a consensus, come to a negotiation, and whatever that new number is, 25%, 30%, whatever, when folks walk away from that table and we're talking about new developments in the city of Boston, everybody's on the same page. So rather than getting caught up in fights and acrimony, we're all moving in consensus and singing from the same songbook.
Well, one problem I'm sure you've heard about is the disparity in city contracts, almost a minuscule amount going to firms headed by women and people of color. What would you do about that?
Well, one of the reasons that I've called for bringing back the Post-Audit and Oversight Committee, which was there when I was a staff member and unfortunately was disbanded a few years ago, is so that we can have a specific body that looks at how city dollars are spent, how city programs are administered, so that we can ask the questions about this, so we can get to those kind of answers and find out about these things before they become the front page of the Globe or the Herald. I think we absolutely have to put our money where our mouth is, quite literally in this sense, and do everything we can to provide the technical support for small businesses in particular, so that they can access the capital that the city has. It's completely unacceptable that women and minority-owned businesses are only receiving such a minuscule amount of city contracts. These are individuals who are homeowners, renters, who are taxpayers here in the city, and they deserve to have a chance at that kind of economic development personally. But it's also the reason why I've proposed in changing our pilot agreements with our major nonprofit institutions to incentivize them to spend their dollars and buying goods and services at our small local businesses. It's the totality of that economic development that we need in terms of turning around new job opportunities and reinvesting in communities. And we should make a particular note that we should do what we can to redirect some of those dollars towards areas that have higher need. So areas that have seen historic levels of underinvestment and undercapitalization. Places like Dudley Square, places like Mattapan Square and Grove Hall, where we want to see more economic vitality, because that economic vitality is linked directly to the housing crisis.
Another problem, this comes back to education, the students who are struggling to finish high school or even after they graduate. You have an idea about pathways to success. What would that do for them?
Sure. Well, as you may be aware, even though we're sitting here on BU's campus, I actually went to Northeastern for a master's degree, and there I got to observe the co-op program up close and personal. And I've proposed making a municipal-style co-op program where we take city agencies, water and sewer, the fire department, the police department, all of those, and partnering them up directly with our city's high schools, so that students can come in as an opt-in program. They can go through the program if they'd like and spend the 4 years learning what those agencies do, who the players are, what the projects they're working on, so that when they graduate, when there's job opportunities, they're ready to step right into those and help diversify a new generation of municipal employees.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
David Halbert, candidate for City Councilor at Large. You'll have more news in just a moment.